So today we have a really important talk for you guys. We're going to do it a little differently. Instead of Elliott kind of standing here and talking about kind of work that he's done through his career, he'll start with that, but it's going to be a little more interactive. So please, as the Q&A kind of time comes up, to be engaged to ask the questions. So the topic today is events, activations, pop-ups, experiences. So it's something that you guys are going to be getting in agencies right away. And when I was over at Outform a couple of months back, these briefs were all that we were getting. So, it was kind of like just kind of a quick idea of what we're talking about here. So think about Wynwood Yard. You have a brand that wants to do an event. So you're walking up to Wynwood Yard. What's the first thing that you guys see before you enter? And when you enter, there is a photo booth. What does that photo booth look like? Is there someone operating the photo booth, or does it operate itself somehow? Is there a hashtag associated with it? This brand happens to be an alcohol brand. So there's food trucks in Wynwood Yard. Which food truck is the right food truck for this alcohol brand pairing? Then you're going to serve the food and you're going to serve the alcohol. What do the plates and the vessels look like that you'll be serving them in? There's going to be people serving. What will they be wearing? And then you go to the next part of Wynwood Yard, and there's something going on there that you've created, and something over here. So there's this whole user journey that you're going through during these events. So we're talking about layers, like 50 different layers that all have to interact with each other and make sense. And this is exactly what Elliott does every day for his job. So he works at Momentum Worldwide. He's a producer of live events. He's here to talk to you about the process of creating events, activations, pop-ups, experiences. And welcome, Elliott. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it. Thank you, guys. So as Jared said, I'm going to cover kind of a broad scale of topics today. I want to take a little bit of time and just give you a brief history of kind of how I've gotten here. But the most important thing, I think, out of this discussion that I want you guys to walk away with are the different hats that you need to put on throughout the process of building an event, soup to nuts, top to bottom, right? A lot of times, your teammates are your most important asset, which I'm sure you guys are finding when you work in groups here. But, when there's client demands that come in, a lot of times there are things that are out of your control. So first thing I want to start with are just a little bit of history. So I started working when I was 22 at an agency called Legacy Marketing in Chicago. I worked on the Pernod Ricard account. Pernod Ricard is also a liquor supplier. They're number 2 in the world and hold brands like Absolute Vodka, Jameson Irish Whiskey, Malibu Rum. And I actually started working on the Malibu Rum team, managing what we call managed bar nights. A managed bar night is basically if you guys are out at a bar and someone walks up to you and says, hey, you guys want to take a shot for this keychain? And it's like, hell yeah, give me the shot. That's a managed bar night. So I managed the inventory for that for the whole year. I hated it. It was boring, right? I was like, I got it. It was important that I saw kind of what went on behind the scenes and, the scale that went and thought that went behind, but the number one thing I took away from that role was quality control, okay? And quality control is definitely one of the most important elements when it comes to an event, and I'll kind of touch on that a little bit later when we get into the different types of events. After Malibu, my boss came up to me and she told me that Malibu was going to start moving into these live events more instead of managed bar nights, which is exactly what Jared just said. A lot of brands and a lot of industries are starting to go in that direction. So we actually did a summer series that was 2 years long, 10 cities in each summer. We had Sierra on tour for the first year. We had Tile Cruz and Neo on tour for the second year. And basically they were beach parties, right? We got to go to 10 cities. The only criteria the client wanted was he wanted a pool, he wanted beach balls, he wanted girls in bikinis, and he wanted a big ass stage with those performers on it. And realistically, it sounds fun, but it was kind of dry. It was like, you can't really bring the brand message forward when A, you're not getting the right kind of brief, and B, when a client really has his mind set on just those deliverables, right? So I did that for 2 years. It was fun. And then my client came up to me and asked if I wanted to work on Jameson. And I was like, well, no shit, I want to work on Jameson. Like, get me over there as soon as possible. And that, I think, is when I learned about the different kind of events and really just how important it is, not only quality control, but how important the brand message is and how you can put an event on and actually have the brand live through that event, okay? So on Jameson, I'm going to categorize these two different events as one as like a program, right, which both the Jameson ones and Malibu fall under, and then sponsorships, which for those of you that have seen that brief that I wrote out about the Dome, that falls in the sponsorship world. And I can talk about that a little later. If there's questions, feel free to attack me later on them. So working on Jameson, the biggest difference was on Malibu, the consumers that came to the event, they didn't care who they were. LDA, meaning legal drinking age, to 58. And to be honest with you, depending on what city we were in, there were a lot of times we almost were like, we might get a handicap line because there were so many old people that were showing up there. And it was like, that's quality control, right? That the client didn't care about. However, you move over to, you get on the Jameson side, they don't spend, contrary to what you guys might believe, not $1 on general marketing to the general public in the United States. I don't know if you guys have ever seen those commercials with the big octopus, right, that comes in and attacks John Jameson and steals his barrel. That was just from a series in the UK that was so successful that they won a bunch of awards and started feeding content over here because it was well received. All Jameson does is focus on trade marketing is what they call it. And when I say trade, it's just like a trade in any industry, right? It's just an expert in that area. So in this case, bartenders, servers, venue owners, venue managers. And basically what they did was they saw there's a thing called industry night, Monday nights, and they decided that they were going to throw these bartenders a party on their off night. And to this day, there's a program that's run, and it's called the Jameson Bartenders Ball. And it essentially is a party for 600 people every Monday in a different city. And when that program started 12 years ago, they had, I don't know, a budget of maybe $400,000 to do about 10 events in 10 markets. Now it's a budget of about $6 million. It's in 56 markets. So 56 markets, think about that. That's 2 teams dividing out an East and West based in Chicago. And they fly out every Sunday. They fly to the market. They load in the event on Monday. They do the event Monday night. They fly home Tuesday. They're back in the office Wednesday. And you're on the road for about 38 weeks of the year. Okay? So event life gets a little rough, okay, on your work-life balance. Trust me. But it's fun. And it's rewarding. And when you're able to kind of, as Jared said, when you're able to see that you back up and you look at ice cubes coming in and cups that are being used and an ice cream vendor over here that's got a bunch of booze in it and a band that's on stage, and you realize that all that came through your planning process, truthfully, I've never felt anything more rewarding. It's very, very cool, especially when people are freaking out and losing their minds about the smallest little thing. So anyway, left Legacy. I felt like I had been doing events for 5 years. I was getting tired from being on the road as much, so I went over to this agency called Walton Isaacson. It was a traditional ad agency. Now, when I go through this, I'm not dogging ads. I'm not dogging print ads. I'm not saying anything bad about anything. But experiential marketing and events is the future. And all of those other disciplines within the marketing umbrella are going to start to resonate and come down under that umbrella. of the event world. Consumer experiences, millennials, right? All they want to do is experience stuff and share it. So that's kind of why it's going in that direction. So at Walton Isaacson, I was working on the Miller Lite account. I was like, I'm going to try beer. Normally beer means bigger budgets, things like Super Bowl. I was like, okay, this could be cool. First meeting I had there, I'm sitting down and a client starts telling me that he wants me to solve for this thing called velocity. And I'm like, what the hell is velocity, right? And they're like, it's just basically how quickly you're selling your product. Okay. And he starts talking about a tap handle. He's like, what can we do with this tap handle to really, really make it sell more beer? And he's like, it's got to be interactive. And I look at myself, I'm like, well, first of all, like, if that tap handle was giving me $1 every time I pulled it, and I'm sorry for Miller Lite lovers in the crowd, but it's still serving Miller Lite. So it's like, I couldn't really get behind it, okay? And that brings me to my next point is you 100%, no matter what brand you're working on or whatever project, you have to be able to put all your emotion and passion behind that brand and believe in it. I quickly realized that working on the Miller Lite account was a bad decision. So I got back into events, I called my buddy up at Momentum, got back in, luckily fell into a Scotch category, and now I'm working on a program with Anthony Bourdain. We're in 10 cities every year in the fall, and we do stuff with this dome, which I'm going to talk about, that is in more of a sponsorship world. But I want to get into a little bit of the process of planning an event, right? And that's what you guys are going to start getting exposed to when you're at agencies. So, like I said, your teammates are everything. And you guys know what a brief is at this point. So when you get that brief, you, as a producer, myself, the most important role that I play in that briefing process is keeping people honest and understanding what's feasible versus not. Because you have client services people, you have account managers, business leaders, whatever you want to call them at different agencies, and those people are supposed to be yes people, right? They're supposed to appease the client, they're supposed to keep them happy, and keep the relationship. My job is to be bad cop. I have to be in that room and insert myself in that process, not only with my account manager, but with my creative team as well, my copywriters, my art directors, okay, graphic designers. Get them all in a room so that we can understand what the asks are and what's feasible. Because when a client comes to you and says, oh, hey, man, I want to go to 10 markets, I got $100,000, and I want to hit, I don't know, 10,000 people on standalone events, it's impossible. That event is going to consist of a line, a really, really shitty check-in app that people aren't going to enjoy. You're going to get people in the door. You're going to maybe give them a sample of something. And by the time you have catering costs and everything out figured out, your budget's tapped. So instead of letting your account manager sit there and be like, yeah, that sounds cool, I'm jazzed about that, let's go do it, you need to kind of, as the producer, put them in check, rein them in a little bit. But the next thing I want to go through is the next step in that process, which is the creative process, right? You need to pull together decks, mock-ups, a run of show. A run of show, for those that might not know, is essentially the entire detailed schedule from the time you open doors at that venue when you're going to load in. Your labor. How many labor people do you need? What are their roles? How are you going to divide them up? By what time do you have to schedule a client walkthrough? What time are you going to do rehearsals at? How much time are you going to leave a buffer for when your client comes in and tells you that he hates it, for you to be able to change things, right? And it all ladders back up, which is your best friend, is that brief. Because if a client comes on site and starts chewing things up, you've got a brief in your hand that says, we're delivering against everything that you asked for. Okay, and the most important thing throughout the planning process is communicating, both with your teammates and with those clients. And you better save your asses and put everything in writing, because I can't tell you how many times I've been on phone calls and we discuss things and it's not documented. And then the clients are like, well, I didn't know that. You didn't say that. And you think that they're all your friends, but they're really not, okay? So do yourself a favor and please make sure if you're planning an event, communicate it and document it. During an event, right? Let's say everything gets signed off and you've got your budgets approved and everything's good to go. Actually, before you get to the event, you're gonna start scouting vendors, your photographers, your caterers. A lot of times venues are gonna have preferred vendors that you have to work with. It's challenging. There's times that a vendor might not be able to give you what you need. And you trying to over-deliver to your client and kind of give them that wow moment, obviously within budget, it could become very problematic. And one of the things that often happens is when vendors come in, they'll ask for a very, very detailed run of show, right? And they'll just start deviating from it. So when you're in the planning process of an event, the big thing you need to think about prior to is you're critically thinking. You're doing floor plans with your creative team. You're thinking about all the minor details. And if you do that correctly, you can probably account for about 70 to 90% of the answers that you need on site if something goes wrong. Okay? Now, once you're on site at the event, your entire job is problem solving. That's it. There's nothing else you need to be doing other than figuring out any issues that come up. Hey, Elliott, Cheryl's puking in the bathroom. What are we going to do? I don't know. Go get the janitor, have it clean it up. Okay, cool, but the client said that it's taking too long to get these people in the door and they're VIPs. Little things like that, those don't matter, okay? The problems that matter are when you've got, and this is a real situation, you've got 1,000 people in a venue in the 9th Ward in New Orleans at 11 p.m. as an after party. And you've gone through the budget exercises multiple times with clients, and the one thing you're sticking out and saying, this is an area known for power outages, because you got to do your homework on everything. We need a generator. The client's like, I'm not spending $5,000 on a generator. There's no chance. Okay. So we got about 750 people in that room, and an hour into the event, power goes down. Okay. So what's the first thing you got to do? It's not worry about communicating this to the people there. It's cover your ass from a compliant perspective and make sure that what you do is not putting anyone in harm. So you call the fire department and the police right away. You get as many people there to help corral people, cab companies. You're in a really bad part of town. But it's those kinds of solutions that you need to think of and be very, very resourceful. Okay? Now, post-event, you have to that night, you better put your working shoes on because we call it event legs at the end of the day, right? Like you can't even walk. You're on site for sometimes 20, 24 hours, working, lifting things, going through all those different train of thoughts like I mentioned. It's really tiring. And then you have to start thinking about your budget reconciliations afterward. Getting recap emails out to all your vendors, to your clients, so that you can get the praise that you need, right? No one's going to give you praise in the agency world unless you go seek it. So it's up to you to put an email out to those clients, praising the event, how successful it was. A lot of times in that brief, they're going to give you things called KPIs, which are key performance indicators. What are the total number of people through the door? How many samples are we giving out? How many t-shirts are we going to give out? Those are all numbers you can recap in there with like a select 10 photos or something just so it's documented. And then you let the emails come in and sit back and enjoy it, right? Any questions on anything so far? I want to show you guys a video really quick on a Jameson video or event that I did just to kind of let you guys see what the venue kind of was. We didn't do a time lapse in it. But this was just a raw warehouse in the West Loop in Chicago. And we essentially turned it into a dinner for 300 people. 300 of the best bartenders in the Chicago area. So when you see this with the detail of things like that are on, excuse me, when you see the detail of, you know, the table settings, the education components that are there, the bands, the uniforms that they're all wearing, those are all things that you got to keep in mind. So, and you said I can control the sound with this? Okay. Okay, so I'll show you, I'm not going to show you another video this second, but there is another one. But that kind of gives you an idea, guys, of like all the moving parts that are there. It's actually kind of funny. I don't even know where that picture went. I'm just going to give up. I don't know if you guys saw that like older gentleman that was sitting in the front row there. He clearly wasn't a bartender. He was the fire marshal in Chicago that came in that afternoon to shut us down, because this venue had a bunch of old wires up there. And even though they weren't live, he was like, no, we're not doing it. So took a little greasing, put him in the front row, gave him a couple drinks, and the event happened, right? So sometimes you just got to play your cards and wheel and deal. However, that's a perfect example of making sure you've got your ducks in a row leading up to it, and that if there's other people coming to this event, which obviously there would be, but especially if it's a liquor company, you've got so much responsibility, right? You cannot let people be overserved. And it's tough with a whiskey or scotch brand, because it's kind of a blessing that it's not vodka that's like got all these crazy flavors, right? And you got all these different crazy cocktails you can serve. It's typically like Jameson would just do soda, ginger ale, and neat or rocks or a shot. And that's great for planning purposes, but responsibility, it could get real hairy real quick. So got to make sure you're conscious about that. Do you guys have any questions about anything? I know I kind of, go ahead. Pardon? How do you control it? Great question. So, here, another mic. Sorry. Question was, how do you control it? So guys, when you get on site, right, and you have this run of show, you need to do staff trainings, okay? A lot of times, like I said, there's a preferred vendor, preferred caterer that's there. A lot of times they've done liquor events so they know. But key messaging pieces that need to be given out, whether it's to the field ambassadors that are welcoming people, checking them in, there's certain words. Welcome to the event. Thanks for coming. We're glad to have you this evening. Just little communication lines like that go a long way, right? And especially when you're having a staff training with your bartenders, we typically say no shots, right? They can do a neat serve, but that's a 1/4 ounce pour. You go get alcohol control spouts, right? So it's only spitting out a 1/4 ounce at a time. You can only have that at an education bar, not available at all of them. And the bartenders just really, really need to use their judgment on if people are overserved or not. But let's be honest, at those events, it was a shit show, right? It was a shit show, but it was a lot of fun. No one was walking out of there. A lot of times you are on the hook to responsibly provide transportation home too, right? Get buses, get shuttles to go places. You don't want anyone driving to these events. Now, I want to kind of shift focus over to the sponsorship side because we haven't really talked on that yet. That's all kind of standalone / programming. And this is going to feed into that brief that I had given you guys. So the sponsorship aspect, and this is kind of the direction William Grant is going, the account I'm working on now. They, trust me, their brand, they have like Hendrick's Gin, Glenfiddich, Balvenie, Sailor Jerry are some of their big ones. But those brands are big enough to host their own events. But what they're starting to do is move into large-scale sampling is what they call. And they're going after this thing called liquid to lips, which is essentially just that. It's just get the liquid in their mouth and let the liquid do the talking, right? So they go to these sponsorships, Austin City Limits, Lollapalooza, Ultra, food and wine festivals like Aspen. And you go to them, and all it is about are sheer scale numbers. So that, it's interesting because it kind of constricts you as a brand for how much room you've got to play with. You know, you normally, if you went in and bought out a venue to do a standalone event, you got the whole venue to work with to get creative. But in this setting, you're paying a $40,000 to $60,000 sponsorship for a 30 by 30 square, right? So then the question in the brief starts to come down to this thing called CPC, cost per consumer. And that's a real KPI, okay? A lot of event companies, a lot of brands, they use how many samples they go through, attendance numbers to judge how well of an event that was, right? This, though, is actually tied right to your budget, which tie right back up to the distributors, which tie right back down to the agency and what's called the 3-tier system. And that affects sales numbers on local levels. It's a very, very important KPI. And it's challenging on the agency side because, like I said, you only have so much space to work with. So, example, we did this Glenfiddich Dome last year. It's a geodesic dome. Show of hands, anyone familiar with geodesic domes? Cool. All right, so a geodesic dome basically looks like an igloo, right? People live in them, ironically enough, but they have everything. They have doors, they have 90-foot ones, they have 10-foot ones. So we bought one of these things for Glenfiddich, and we decided we were going to do craft cocktails in it and kind of give people a new look on Scotch, okay? And we have 3 marks of Glenfiddich that we were serving in there, a 12-year, a 14-year, and what we call IPA. So the 12-year was meant to kind of capture that novice Scotch drinker or someone that's at the bar shooting Tullamore Dew shots, right? And get them on Scotch, because if you give them the Scotch, they're going to be like, no, that's what my grandfather drinks. I don't want to touch it. That's disgusting. But you're like, no, come on. Try the Scotch. Taste it in this lemonade with a big lavender wand in it. Trust me, it's good. Hooked. Got him, right? The other mark is 14-year. That's meant to go after a bourbon barrel drinker. Or, I'm sorry, a bourbon drinker. So, no, I don't drink Scotch. I just drink my Bullet. Cool, we'll try this old-fashioned. And then they're like, oh, an old-fashioned with really good Scotch in it? Hooked. Got them. And the IPA is for your beer aficionados, right? It's an IPA cask-finished Scotch. It's got like blood orange and malted barley notes in it. You put it in a cocktail with beer in it and an orange slice. and they're amazed that it's Scotch. And it's just the key message points that you're giving them and those quick interactions, because it's so turn and burn in these small footprints that people are, the goal is that when they walk out of there, they're like, oh man, did you go to that Glenfiddich Dome? A, it's air conditioned, which is pretty dope when you're at a hot music festival. B, there's floor to ceiling projections in it this year, which for, you know, a dome, it's pretty cool. But most importantly, I mean, everything in there is shareable, right? Everyone walks in and the first thing they do is they've got their phone out and they're walking around taking pictures. And you strategically place things so that it's easy for the people inside to remember their messaging points. We put a door on it this year. I don't know if any of you guys saw that brief, but last year we had this giant gaping hole in the front of the dome for people to walk in and out of, and the $4,000 air conditioner that we spent was just cranking cold air right out the front door. Efficiencies, right? So put a door on the front. That actually does a whole lot of things. It keeps the sun out so that the projections would work better. And sometimes, I'm going to give you, like, sometimes things just go your way when you're doing an event. You guys know what a gobo is? Show of hands. Okay, a gobo is one of those lights that just is like a projection of a logo that's on a wall or the ground or something like that. They're expensive. They're really annoying because they're an eyesore. But sometimes, like when I say things just happen to go right, we're sitting there at that event, and one of the projectors shot through the decal that was on the front door, gobo right out on the ground. And like everyone was coming up to me, they're like, oh man, like that's great. How'd you guys position that gobo like that? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Right? So that's in the rare case that the event world treats you right. Because more often than not, I like to tell people that in events, there's not a better industry or profession to prove that Murphy's Law is a real thing, right? So that's kind of sponsorships. And when I wrote this brief for you guys, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I know not all of you saw it, but when I wrote the brief for you guys, I purposely left it very open-ended. I wanted you guys to kind of just get creative and run with it. I know that Jared said it was more of a real brief in the sense that there's key deliverables tied to it, and there's some specifics in there in terms of like how many markets you had to hit and how many people you need to hit and the types of events you needed to go to. But please do not feel like constricted to those things, right? You can open it up and run with it. I just want to know what you guys would do if you had to go to those events, dome or no dome. I can show you, I want to get into one other event platform because it gets into the industry a little bit deeper and some of the creative ways you can do things and solve. But I'm going to just open up for questions one more time if there's anything else. Yes?
How do you research what kind of activations or events you want to do for a specific target? Okay, good question.
So, I mean, if you want to do a one-off event, right, you kind of look back at the goals of what the client's asking, right? So if the client says, if their biggest KPI is going to be on numbers, then you're probably going to recommend to sponsor something just to get that volume, right? But hey, I mean, one idea, steal it. This whole events world is just about steal it and one-up it, right? So there's a lot of times that there's rinse and repeat activations that happen. And it's funny, like when you start working with fabricators to get custom pieces made, right? It's funny how many fabricators in this world all of the competitive brands use the same five or six, because they're really good at it and they get it and they know where to come in at budget-wise. But you can look at things that, you know, people do at things like the Super Bowl. You technically would go to large platforms like that and see what brands are doing. You definitely want to look at the hot brands that are around, liquor or no liquor, right? And just see what people are gravitating towards. But I think one of the biggest things is what's social, right? Like what's out there on social that people love. And that's typically the way that we would figure it out. Yeah. Yeah.
Quick question. Is there a difference between activations and events? And if so, could you sort of like give us some insight?
Sure. Yes, there is. Technically, you could call it activating an event, right? But an activation could be something like I mentioned before, like that managed bar night. That's not an event. You know what I mean? But it's still an activation because you're going out there and you're giving somebody a branded experience, or you're communicating something with that brand. If you're activating the brand, essentially, imagine an on and off button, right? If you're turning that button on and there's something coming out of someone's mouth that's a brand message, or you're giving them collateral that's branded, that's an activation. Cool? Yeah.
What's the standard timeline from a client? I know it's different from each one of them, but
A standard timeline?
yeah.
There's no such thing, man. No, I'm kidding. It depends. Is it a program or a one-off, right? If it's a standard, if it's a program, you've got to get a brief 3-4 months in advance. You have to, because there's so many different things that the client's going to change their mind on, and then before you know it, you're a month out, and it's like, all right, we got to start getting things contracted now. Please sign this budget so that we can have our money and do this, right? But I would say typically you want to be 3 to 4 months out for a healthy planning process.
Hi, how are you? My question is, influencers have been like the big topic in general, but how well they work in terms of like Instagram and YouTuber influencers against like a celebrity?
Okay, great question. So I'm going to give you guys an example for this. I'm going to go back to Jameson again, right? So Jameson and a lot of marketing agencies, especially with liquor brands, they have things called market managers, right? And those people are in those markets, and they're the market expert that go in, establish the relationship with bars, restaurants, XYZ. And what started to happen is they've all been recently changing that direction. Market managers are being let go in favor of influencers, okay? So what Jameson actually did was they had a program that they introduced called the Local Program. And what they did was, Jameson being this hot, giant brand, they paired it with 2 smaller brands in their category or in their portfolio that they thought had a lot of potential behind them. One of them was Olmeca Altos Tequila, and the other one was Redbreast. It's a single pot still whiskey, okay? So what they did was they hired these locals in key markets, and they had no event experience. They didn't know how to manage an on-premise account. They were just influencers in that market. They did some sort of cool thing, right? They hired them, they gave them a credit card, and they said, I want you to start hosting events and bring your people to them. And it has literally, the budgets have grown from about a $2 million program for about 40 employees. I think it's up to like $12 million now. So to answer your question, influencers work. They do not need to be celebrities. You just have to know the people that are cool. They know the places, the ins and outs of their market, and they can go in and establish a relationship, but it's not sales driven. It's just about the experience.
In what ways do you link your events to social media, and how do you think this helps the event? Because I probably think it's like before, during, and after the event, and it's kind of recent.
Yeah, good question. So to be honest, you could probably get a million different answers on this one, right? I don't know if there really is one right answer, but in my opinion, I don't want to ever force anything. Right, I want to let the consumer come in and discover it on their own and then control it the way that they want. Now, obviously, you need to set them up for success to do that, so making sure your hashtag, your Twitter handle, whatever it is visible places, but you also don't want it to look like the Twitter bird threw up everywhere in your event, right? You need it to be tastefully placed. Napkins, on a cup, on a gobo maybe, on a premium giveaway that you're giving out. Those are ways that they're going to physically carry the hashtag with them. Anything that can be mobile instead of static goes a long way. Yes.
Do you find it beneficial to do a social media activation before the event, like leading up to it?
In the sense of recruiting, yes. right? Because if you're going to have a party, you got to get numbers there. You got to get people there. In liquor, it's very tricky because that can get you in a lot of hot water legally. There's a lot of restrictions around how you're able to recruit for your events and promote them in certain markets. But yes, anything that you can do, satellite events, what we would call them, just like small one-offs leading up to that, is always the best way to get people recognized and knowledgeable about the upcoming event.
Could you give an example of a satellite event?
Sure. So I mentioned the Anthony Bourdain program that we're running for Balvenie. Essentially, what it is we shoot these webisodes on YouTube. They're called the Raw Craft series, and they're about 15, 20-minute episodes, similar to the style format of one of his television shows. And the day prior to those events, when we have him, we host like a bartender lunch, right? But you have to legally RSVP through that account, that bar that it's taking place at, to be compliant. So what we'll do is host small satellite tastings that the brand will go in, do a spend, right? They'll swipe their card for $500. Anyone between the hours of 6 and 7 p.m. that come in on a Tuesday can drink off of that tab, and then they get the invitation to come. Make sense? Yeah. That's an example of a satellite event.
Hi.
Hi.
What was the hashtag for the dome, and also, what did you serve the drinks in exactly?
Like the vessels?
Yeah, because can you serve glass? Does it have to be plastic?
Good question. Good question. So, if you're at a festival, it has to be plastic, and not only plastic, it has to be compostable greenware, because that just does. Hashtag was GF experiments. I personally don't like it at all. I think it's too long. But I don't work for a social media agency, so that's over my pay grade.
Thanks.
Anything else, guys? I want to show you. Yeah, go ahead. You good on time? Good on time?
I know you said you worked with art directors and copywriters,
yes.
But what does your team look like? I mean, you're a producer, but when we finish here and we want to get hired right out into events, like what does that structure look like?
So it depends on the agency. You know, when I was at Legacy, you kind of did everything as a unit, minus the creative aspects. So that creative team always lives under the creative umbrella. When I mentioned before that there's account managers and business leaders that are more client services, wearing that hat means that you typically don't have a whole lot to do with the build out of an event, right? You're not really going to do a site visit. You're not thinking about what the lights are going to look like. You're strictly in conjunction with that producer to work through the budget and report that back to the client. At Momentum, it's a little bit different. So they break down those silos a little bit, and you're kind of more across the board. And even more so, like I said, you're like a copywriter role. They would typically always stay in the creative wheelhouse, but they are involved much earlier in that process here. And it's important that they are, because they need to see what the client feedback is, and even their immediate reaction when you present something and the look on their face is like, what are you talking about, right? That copywriter needs to know, like, what words are his eyebrows going up at when you use, you know? I hope that answers your question. Okay, so guys, I'm going to jump in. I want to show you just one kind of video that we did. There's a thing in New Orleans. Anyone ever heard of Tales of the Cocktail before? Okay, cool. So, you what? Oh, okay, there you go. So Tales of the Cocktail is essentially a festival, right? It's the world's largest bartender trade cocktail industry convention, for lack of a better term. Brands throw hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars at this. It's a week long in the middle of July in New Orleans. There's parties every single night. It's grown from about 13 people to about 35,000. And it literally takes over the city in the summer. It's great economically. And then at the end of the week, there is an award ceremony where they start handing out things like World's Best Bartender, World's Best New Drink Menu, World's Best Bar. And they've started to break it down so much into categories like World's Best High Volume Cocktail Restaurant, right? Broken Shaker here, Broken Shaker's won a couple awards. I think radio's been up for some awards. The Edition, I think, actually won a big award a couple years ago for hotel bar. But I want to just show you an example of an event that I did down there once. And I just want to talk about problem solving with how you can get creative with the event space that you're using after you see this. And then there's a quick video on responsibility that I want to just show you on messaging, and then we can take any final questions and wrap up. This thing's not going.
I want in, I want in, I want in. I want in, I want in, I want in.
All right, so that was called the Bartender's Breakfast.
Tell anyone about this.
Well, I'll show you this in just a second. But that was the Bartender's Breakfast event, and that is like the final finale event after the awards ceremony before everyone goes home. And the reason I showed it is because we actually were planning that event, and we got down to tails on the previous Sunday, and we started to go to load into our venue, and there were police there, and apparently the venue didn't have any of the permits that they told us that they did when they signed the contract, and it was a nautical themed event, right? So we didn't have a venue anymore, and the city was kind of course they were helping us because it was a terrible spot and it was their fault, but essentially we needed to solve for where this party for 1,500 people was going to be in 5 days. So instead of trying to recreate all these custom nautical themed pieces that were squared to the dimensions of the wall space that we were going to put them on, we just rented out the aquarium, right? Go to the aquarium, put all the fish tanks as your backdrop, and you repurpose all that money back in to just do the talent, the events, or I'm sorry, the cocktails, the vessels. I mean, I can't tell you how many tuna cans I hand canned with a gin and tonic in it for that event, right? It's insane, but problem solving, getting creative, right? That's a good example of that. So the last thing I just want to show you guys really quick, I know I talked about it before, is messaging, right? And having to be responsible is very important, especially in liquor. I think a lot of times the little drink responsibly things on commercials and people that say, hey, like, please don't have another drink, it goes overshadowed, right? So we released this video. There's a lot of very influential, famous bartenders that are in this and brand ambassadors from different portfolios. But we put this together to kind of just push out to everyone as a reminder that Tails needs to be, you need to drink responsible there.
But this is between you and me, right?
Between you and me?
Yeah, this is a sacred space.
This only happens when I get down to Tails and I wake up with a blonde wig on and lipstick just around my nose and not even on my lips. And
we flew in that bartender from Dubai.
Yeah.
About him?
I have nightmares of body parts and things swinging and...
I don't know what time it is. I know the sun's up. I know I probably shouldn't be out drinking still.
It was poetry in motion in between the sheets, horizontal hula hoop.
I don't know.
I'm so used to having cornstarch pulled all over me, and it's really tough when I wake up in the morning every morning after tails, and I really need a water-soluble condiment to wash this cornstarch off. And
there's bridal dresses around me. I'm not dressed.
I am a filthy, naughty, nasty, dirty.
There were basketballs, there were tennis balls, there were beach balls.
We're drinking our high lives, you know, we're hanging out, and she's like, let's go take photos in the photo booth.
I think there were live chickens in the room at some point. I think those feathers came from live chickens.
So I take a running jump, get in the horse, and I start galloping down Bourbon Street.
No way.
Truly.
One thing led to another, and, you know, everybody's pants are at their ankles, and
I hear there's video, but I haven't seen it. Just gyrating bodies encased me. It was... Now that I think of it, it wasn't so bad.
I won't tell anybody. That's not here right now. Guess what happened to my buddy Ivy, guys? This is crazy!
Just kind of a, lighthearted way to convey a message to everyone using everyone else's friends in a very tight-knit industry, right? So I'm going to just open back up. Any other questions about anything? I know we kind of covered a lot here, but if there's specific questions with whether it's event production or the briefing process or roles across the board, I'm happy to take them. And anyone that has any questions about that dome for tomorrow's discussions, feel free to come up and talk to me afterward. Cool. Got one there.
How is the planning process different from when you're briefed to do an event or an activation, or a creative team kind of suggests doing an event or an activation?
So that's a good question. I have a very love-hate relationship with creative teams. They're very demanding, a lot, and they think that they have all the answers, and they don't. However, they're creative, and they're the ones that often are going to come up to you with those ideas that you just need to keep in a running document, so that when that final brief does come, that one that your art director, Amy, is going to literally jump out of her seat about because her idea is going to work, it works. So the process doesn't really change, to be honest. I feel like I keep diverting back to this, but I can't stress how important it is to get those creatives in the room with the clients when you're getting briefed at the very beginning, because that's when the more eyes and ears you can have exposed to that, the better. And if I took that and kind of held it to my own and started putting thought to it, not only am I gonna keep that time right away from other people, but I'm gonna start then investing in my own emotions and thoughts and think that those are the best way to go. Everyone is guilty of that in this planning process world, but I would say that the process is pretty much the same. It's just getting creative in and trying to keep them in check because they're not always right.